Both Safe Space 1 and 2 can be found under the Culemborg Bridge in the Cape Town foreshore. And the first of these was established in 2018 as a transitional shelter for people who wanted to get off the street. And since then, they have expanded. One of the reasons that these safe spaces are in the spotlight at the moment is because of the impending eviction of homeless encampments from 7 sites around the Cape Town inner city. What happened was that there was a court judgment that was handed down by the Western Cape High Court on 18 June, and that gave the city the go-ahead to evict these sites on the condition that they provided alternative accommodation for the people who would be moved out of those spaces. The City of Cape Town is the driving force behind establishing these shelters, but they are managed by external service providers. In a recent post on the social media platform X, Cape Town Mayor Jordan Hill-Lewis described these safe spaces as places where occupants could get dignity that they weren't able to get on the street. And the problem here is that occupants of Safe Space 1 have told us that unhygienic and undignified conditions at the shelter are impacting on the health and the well-being of residents. And one resident of Safe Space 1 described the shelter as a travesty of human rights. The occupants of Safe Space 1 have come forward with a number of allegations about the way of life there in the shelter, but one of the main ones regards the nature of the shelter that's provided. So in Safe Space 2, you have prefabricated buildings with solid walls and a ceiling. But in Safe Space 1, the residents allege that the shelter is a corrugated iron roof on metal poles. There are no solid walls, and what walls have been created are created by the residents themselves and involve the hanging of blankets, plastic sheeting, even bags of belongings that can sort of break the wind or the elements around that shelter. There is, of course, the bridge above the overall shelter, but that's some 15 plus meters up, and doesn't really provide the kind of secure space that you would want. Videos and photographs of Safe Space 1 have been sent through to Daily Maverick, and what we can see is that it appears that some of the beds are barely protected from the elements, and that's particularly concerning when you take into account the vicious storms we've seen in the mother city over the last week or so. What that's meant for occupants, they say, is that a lot of their belongings, their beds, their clothing are damp, are wet, and can't be kept dry. So it is voluntary living at Safe Space 1, and so one question might be, why do people stay in that space if the conditions are so poor? And the answer is simple. Life on the street is incredibly brutal. One of the men I spoke to, he said that he'd been stabbed 47 times at one stage while living on the street, and it was really only his jacket that saved his life. What Safe Space 1 provides before anything else is a fenced-off area where there's less risk of individuals being harmed or attacked while they rest. One of the key features of safe spaces and Safe Space 1 and 2 that are marketed by the city is that they not only offer shelter, but also rehabilitation and educational programs and access to certain support services. One of the allegations we've had from people who are staying at Safe Space 1 is that these courses become more of a box-ticking exercise than a real educational opportunity, and that there's not enough substance to them to genuinely help people. At the time that the court order was handed down, it seemed that the alternative accommodation the city would offer to evictees would be Safe Space 1. However, since then, the city has said these evictees will actually be offered alternative accommodation at a new, yet-to-be-completed shelter called Ebenezer Safe Space in Greenpoint. The city stated that, according to the court ruling, for them to provide just and equitable shelter to people meant providing shelter that was better than what the occupants had experienced before, i.e., when they were living on the street. When it comes to the shelter that's been provided at Safe Space 1, the city stated that there have been recent upgrades to the roof of the highway, which is over the shelter, and claimed that further effort was made to create windproof barriers around the shelter.